For 3,000 years, the galaxy had known nothing but peace. The Galactic Council, a coalition of the most powerful species in the known universe, had maintained this fragile harmony. Humanity, a relatively young species, had joined the Council after proving themselves cooperative, peaceful, and far less aggressive than many had expected. They were welcomed as productive members of the Alliance, helping to foster trade, diplomacy, and unity. Yet, beneath the surface, something had shifted. Whispers of unease had begun to circulate within the Council. What was once a species regarded as docile had started to grow in ways the Council hadn't anticipated. Humanity had spread rapidly across the stars, colonizing new worlds and mastering technologies at an alarming rate. Their influence was expanding, quietly but undeniably. They were no longer the cooperative, restrained race the Council had believed them to be. Instead, they had become a force. A force that could, one day, threaten the balance the Council had worked so hard to maintain. As the Council convened in their grand chamber, a palpable tension filled the room. Representatives from the most ancient and powerful races sat in silence, their eyes fixed on the Council's high speaker. The subject on the agenda was clear: humanity. It had taken them centuries to recognize the quiet ascent of the Terrans. While they had distracted themselves with managing interspecies disputes and trade agreements, humanity had been preparing, advancing faster than anyone could have anticipated. This cannot continue, the High Speaker declared, his voice cutting through the heavy air. We have given them their place, allowed them to prosper under our watchful eyes, and now, they grow too bold. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. A once overlooked species had grown too strong, and the Council had allowed it to happen. The Council's brightest strategists presented data, charts, and projections. In mere decades, humanity had leapt ahead in technological development, building fleets, fortifying colonies, and quietly preparing for something. But what? This was the fear: uncertainty. The galaxy thrived on predictability and order. Humanity's rapid rise was a chaotic variable that could no longer be ignored. One after another, Council members voiced their concerns. The once peaceful, unassuming humans had amassed weapons capable of matching, even surpassing, those of some of the Council's oldest members. They had become masters of innovation, creating military strategies no other species could predict or counter. The humans were too adaptable, too unpredictable. This was no longer just about maintaining peace. It was about control. Humanity had to be stopped before they became uncontrollable. There was no dissent. The decision was clear. War was the only option, and it had to be swift, decisive, and absolute. The Council, in their arrogance, believed that humanity's perceived weakness, its soft diplomacy, its preference for cooperation, would make them easy prey. After all, this was a species that had never waged galactic war, unlike the others. They lacked the bloodlust, the sheer ruthlessness, that the Council's more aggressive members had honed over millennia. They assumed humans would either surrender quickly or be crushed under the might of the combined Council fleets. The vote was unanimous. The Council, in its infinite wisdom, would declare war on humanity. They had no reason to doubt their victory. It would be quick, clean, and the humans would once again be put in their place. Peace would return to the galaxy, but this time, it would be a peace on the Council's terms, with humanity as a lesser power, forever under their control. As the meeting adjourned and the war declaration was finalized, there was a sense of grim satisfaction among the Council members. They believed they had made the right decision. They believed they were about to eliminate a threat before it could grow out of control. But they had made one critical mistake: they had gravely underestimated the humans. The moment the Galactic Council's declaration of war reached Earth, there was no widespread panic. Humanity had learned long ago to remain calm in the face of adversity. The news hit like a shockwave, but it wasn't chaos that followed, it was preparation. Humanity had been at peace for thousands of years, but this wasn't a species that had grown complacent. The declaration was met with measured responses, quiet yet calculated, as if this had been anticipated for some time. The Terran Defense Command, long dismissed by other species as unnecessary, immediately went into action. High-ranking military officials and leaders gathered in secure rooms across Earth and its colonies, voices low but firm. The most prominent among them were seasoned strategists and former diplomats, individuals who had seen the slow build-up of tension between the Council and humanity but had always hoped it would never come to this. However, they weren't unprepared. They had been planning for this possibility for decades, even if the Council believed humans incapable of such foresight. As the declaration spread across human-controlled space, the military gears began turning. War simulations that had been running in the background for years were activated. Earth's leaders didn't need to make impassioned speeches, they had been quietly ready. Peace, but always ready for war, had been their guiding principle during the years of galactic stability. They knew the fragility of peace, and had ensured that if the time came, they would not be caught off guard. What the Council didn't know was that humanity had spent centuries not just coexisting, but learning. While the rest of the galaxy assumed humans were focused on diplomacy and trade, Terran engineers and scientists had been perfecting technologies far beyond what they let the galaxy see. The fleet, hidden within vast shipyards scattered across human territory, was far more powerful than anything the Council had faced before. The humans didn't need to boast or threaten. They had allowed the Council to believe in their inferiority because it had served their purposes. The Council had grown too used to seeing humans as diplomatic, cooperative, too soft for true galactic warfare. That was their first mistake. In truth, humanity's war machine had been quietly evolving in the shadows. What the Council mistook for weakness had been patience and careful planning. Now, with war declared, humanity's true strength began to surface. Fleets of star ships, sleek and deadly, were mobilized. These weren't the crude vessels the Council believed humans used, these were technological masterpieces, built with cutting-edge propulsion, cloaking, and weapons systems. Earth's best minds had designed them, knowing that someday, the Council would make this move. The ships were more advanced than anything the Council could have imagined, a testament to human ingenuity and strategic foresight. Beyond the fleet, there were ground forces, cyber warfare divisions, and AI-driven strategies, all designed for rapid adaptation. Humanity had studied every member of the Galactic Council, understanding their strengths and weaknesses better than they knew themselves. The adaptability that had allowed humans to thrive on their homeworld and beyond now translated into warfare. Humans weren't bound by the rigid hierarchies or predictable tactics the Council species relied on. Their ability to think on their feet, to change the rules of engagement at a moment's notice, was a key advantage the Council had failed to anticipate. Among the commanders preparing for the coming conflict, there was a sense of grim resolve. They knew what was at stake, and they knew how badly the Council had miscalculated. The Council's fleets were vast, yes, but they were rigid and outdated in their strategies. Humanity, on the other hand, was a sleeping giant that had just been awakened. The Galactic Council had underestimated human willpower and tactical genius. They believed a declaration of war would be enough to crush humanity's spirit, that humans would fold or make desperate, futile attempts to resist. They couldn't have been more wrong. What they didn't realize was that humanity's greatest strength wasn't just its technology or its fleets. It was their unity, their ability to adapt, and their relentless determination to survive. The humans weren't fighting for conquest or power. They were fighting for their survival, for their place in the galaxy, and for the right to exist without fear of domination. And when humanity was pushed to the brink, they didn't break. They fought back. As the Terran fleets began to mobilize and their leaders prepared for the coming war, one thing became clear: humanity was about to show the galaxy just how wrong it had been to declare war on them. They would not be crushed, and they would not surrender. Instead, they would rise to meet the challenge with everything they had. The Galactic Council's fleet arrived at the edge of human space, their ships casting massive shadows across the void. They were certain of their dominance. To them, this was nothing more than a formality, an overwhelming show of force to remind the upstart humans of their place in the galactic hierarchy. The fleet, composed of thousands of warships from multiple Council species, dwarfed anything they expected humanity to muster. Victory was supposed to be swift and absolute. As the fleet crossed the boundary into human territory, they encountered little resistance at first. There were no immediate signs of defensive stations, no large fleets to greet them. The Council commanders exchanged smug looks. This would be easier than they thought. Humanity was clearly not prepared for the might of the galaxy's finest. Their so-called preparations must have been bluff and bluster. The Council had seen it before with other smaller species who had been brought to heel. But just as the fleet moved deeper into human space, something changed. Sensors flickered. Long-range scanners picked up strange signals, distortions in space that didn't match any known data. Before the Council commanders could issue orders, the first wave of human ships appeared, out of nowhere. They were fast, sleek, and equipped with advanced cloaking technology that bypassed the Council's detection systems entirely. Without warning, the humans attacked. Their weapons were not the primitive lasers and missiles the Council expected, but precise, devastating energy pulses and high-velocity railguns, each strike calculated to disable key systems on the Council's ships. It wasn't just a matter of firepower. It was the efficiency, the speed. The Council's fleet, vast and powerful, had been designed for drawn-out battles against known threats. They weren't ready for an enemy that moved like ghosts in the dark. The initial confusion among the Council ranks turned into shock as ship after ship fell. Human fighters darted through the massive Council warships, using superior maneuverability and advanced AI to anticipate enemy movements, adapt, and strike before the Council forces could react. The Council's once proud formations dissolved into chaos. Orders to regroup were met with static, as human cyber attacks infiltrated their communications, further crippling their coordination. The Council commanders were stunned. They had prepared for brute force, for overwhelming numbers to crush a seemingly weaker foe. But the humans weren't fighting with numbers. They were fighting with ingenuity, precision, and strategies that none of the Council species had encountered before. Their ships seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once, darting in and out of combat, striking vital systems, and vanishing before a counterattack could be launched. Every move the Council made was met with a perfect counter, as if the humans had anticipated their every tactic. Council ships, one after another, were disabled or destroyed, the battlefield littered with debris from the Council's once mighty fleet. The human forces moved methodically, striking key targets, crippling the largest and most dangerous vessels first. It was clear that this wasn't a random assault, it was a carefully planned engagement. Humanity had been prepared for this moment, and they had executed their defense flawlessly. As the battle raged on, the shock turned to panic. The Council's forces scrambled for explanations, trying to make sense of the devastating loss they were suffering. How had the humans developed such technology? Where had these ships come from? Their intelligence had told them humanity was far behind in military capabilities, yet here they were, outmaneuvering and outthinking them at every turn. In their arrogance, the Council had believed the war would be over before it even began. Now, they were watching their fleets burn, their greatest ships torn apart by a species they had never truly feared. The Council's forces, despite their overwhelming numbers, were now on the defensive, retreating in disarray as human ships continued to press the attack. The human fleet didn't relent. They pushed the Council forces out of their territory with relentless precision, forcing the Council to retreat further and further, until they were left with no choice but to fall back entirely. The Council's grand invasion had turned into a disastrous defeat. In the aftermath, there was only silence on the Council's command channels. They had been humiliated, their fleet decimated in a single engagement. The humans had shown their hand, and it was far more powerful than the Council had ever imagined. As the human ships returned to their defensive positions, it was clear that this battle had been more than just a victory. It had been a statement: humanity was ready. The Galactic Council had believed they would crush the humans with ease, but instead, they had been met with a force they couldn't comprehend. The humans had been prepared all along, and now, the Council was left scrambling for answers, trying to piece together how everything had gone so terribly wrong. The Galactic Council had never known such humiliation. Their once proud fleets had been torn apart by a species they had long considered inferior. In the aftermath of their crushing defeat, desperation began to creep into the Council's ranks. They had underestimated humanity in the worst possible way, and now they were scrambling to save face and their control of the galaxy. The Council convened once again, but the atmosphere was starkly different from before. The confidence, the arrogance, was gone. In its place was fear, frustration, and panic. For some, the solution was simple: escalate the conflict, throw everything they had at humanity, and crush them by sheer force. But this was no longer about numbers or brute strength. The Council had already seen that humanity's adaptability and ingenuity far outstripped their own rigid, hierarchical tactics. Yet, in their desperation, many of the Council's leaders refused to accept that their initial strategy had failed. Instead, they doubled down, willing to go to any lengths, no matter how brutal, to win this war. Within the Council, cracks began to show. Some of the more pragmatic races started to question the wisdom of the war itself. The defeat had shaken them, and they began to wonder whether humanity could even be defeated at all. Whispered conversations took place behind closed doors, Council members nervously discussing the potential consequences. Could they have made a mistake in declaring war? Was it too late to reconsider? But the voices of reason were drowned out by those blinded by pride and fear. The Council couldn't back down now, not after suffering such a public defeat. To admit they were wrong, to seek peace, would be seen as weakness, and their entire reputation would crumble. They had built their power on maintaining control, and to lose that control to humans was unthinkable. So, they escalated. New fleets were sent into human space, larger and more heavily armed. They began employing more ruthless tactics, targeting civilian colonies, disrupting supply lines, and deploying weapons they had previously considered too unethical to use. Entire planets became battlegrounds, with Council forces ignoring the collateral damage. To them, this was now a war of survival. If humanity couldn't be subdued, then they had to be obliterated. Yet, even with this escalation, humanity continued to win. Battle after battle, the humans outmaneuvered them. They exploited every weakness in the Council's rigid structure, turning their own strategies against them. Council fleets would attempt to regroup, only to be ambushed by human forces that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Human soldiers, despite being outnumbered, proved far more resilient, their ground forces using guerrilla tactics that the Council's more traditional military couldn't counter. It wasn't just about strength, it was about adaptability. Humans didn't fight by the rules the Council expected. Where other species in the Council relied on brute force and predictable strategies, humans thrived in the chaos. They used their knowledge of the Council's tactics to devastating effect, constantly shifting their approach to keep the Council off balance. As the war dragged on, human diplomats extended offers for peace. They proposed negotiations, terms that could end the bloodshed before it spiraled out of control. But the Council, consumed by their desperation, refused. They couldn't afford to negotiate with a species they had already labeled as a threat. To make peace now, after everything that had happened, would be an admission of failure. And so, the offers were rejected, each one met with silence or more aggression. Behind closed doors, however, the Council was beginning to fracture. Some races, those who had been less involved in the war's initial declaration, were starting to pull back. They saw where this was headed, and they didn't like it. Others, more desperate and entrenched in their belief that they could still win, began to consider the unthinkable. If they couldn't win with fleets, maybe they could win with weapons of mass destruction. The idea of deploying planet-destroying weapons, superweapons that had long been outlawed by the Council itself, began to surface in hushed conversations. It was a sign of just how far the Council had fallen. What had once been a governing body dedicated to peace and stability was now considering genocide. They believed it was their only option. If they could just destroy Earth, wipe out humanity's homeworld in one final, decisive strike, then maybe, just maybe, they could end this war. The morality of such a decision barely registered. The Council's desperation had eroded their sense of ethics, leaving only fear and pride to guide their actions. As the Council prepared for their final assault, tensions reached a boiling point. They knew this would be their last chance to crush humanity. If this failed, there would be no more options. The fleets were mobilized, the superweapons quietly prepped in secret locations. This was their final play. The Council was about to bet everything on one last, devastating attack. They were willing to sacrifice everything, morality, stability, even their own principles, just to avoid the unthinkable, defeat at the hands of humanity. The final battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Galactic Council's last, desperate assault was colossal. Their fleets were a sea of ships, stretching far beyond the range of human sensors. This was it, the Council had thrown everything they had into this one final push. They believed that, by sheer numbers, they could overwhelm humanity, crush them, and erase the shame of their earlier defeats. But humanity had been preparing for this moment all along. Outnumbered and outgunned, humanity stood firm. Earth's leaders had no illusions about the scale of the threat before them. They knew that traditional tactics wouldn't win this fight, but they also knew that brute strength had never been humanity's greatest asset. Instead, they relied on their ingenuity, their unpredictability, and their willingness to adapt. As the Council's fleets approached, the humans unleashed a coordinated cyber offensive. Vast swarms of AI-driven programs infiltrated the Council's ships, disrupting communications, corrupting targeting systems, and turning the Council's technological advantage into a crippling weakness. Confusion spread through the Council's ranks, as their ships began malfunctioning, weapon systems failed to fire, and command chains broke down. The humans had turned the Council's own reliance on rigid hierarchy against them. But that was only the beginning. Humanity had always excelled at asymmetric warfare, and now, they put that skill to devastating use. Small, fast-moving human strike teams penetrated the Council's vast fleets, targeting key ships with precision strikes. EMP blasts disabled entire sectors of the Council's formations, leaving their ships vulnerable and defenseless. Guerrilla tactics that would have been impossible in traditional space warfare were now humanity's greatest weapon. Council ships fell in waves, their vast numbers becoming meaningless as human forces dismantled their fleet piece by piece. Each strike was calculated, each move perfectly timed. The Council's overwhelming firepower was rendered useless by the human superior strategy and technological ingenuity. Human commanders anticipated every move, adapting on the fly to counter the Council's outdated tactics. As the Council's fleet crumbled, the leadership that had once been so certain of victory found themselves trapped. Their best ships, their greatest commanders, all rendered powerless by a species they had considered too weak to challenge them. Panic spread through the Council ranks. Some tried to retreat, but there was no escape. The human forces had encircled them, and there was no way out. In the end, the Council's last fleet was either destroyed or forced to surrender. Their final attempt to subjugate humanity had failed. It wasn't just a military defeat, it was a complete and total collapse of everything the Council had believed in. Their leaders, those who hadn't been killed in the fighting, were captured. For the first time in millennia, the galaxy's most powerful governing body had been brought to its knees by the very species they had underestimated. But humanity, despite their triumph, didn't seek revenge. They had no interest in total destruction or domination. Instead, they offered peace, but it was peace on their terms. The message was clear: the galaxy would no longer be ruled by the Council's outdated and rigid systems. Humanity had proven their strength, not just through war, but through their ability to survive, adapt, and overcome even the greatest of challenges. The Council, now broken, had no choice but to accept humanity's terms. The remaining members, those who hadn't fled in disgrace or been captured, were left with no illusions. This was a new era, one in which humanity would play a central role. They had fought for their survival, and now they were ready to shape the galaxy's future. A human leader, standing before what remained of the Council, delivered the final message. The war was over. Peace would return, but it would be a different kind of peace, one built on the principles of cooperation, respect, and mutual strength. Humanity had no desire to repeat the mistakes of the Council. They didn't seek to dominate the galaxy as tyrants. But they made one thing clear: the days of underestimating humanity were over. The message echoed throughout the galaxy. Humanity, once seen as weak and inferior, had risen to the challenge and emerged victorious. They had faced overwhelming odds, fought back against an entrenched power, and had come out stronger for it. Their resilience, their ability to adapt and evolve, had carried them through. And now, the galaxy would have to reckon with this new reality. As the remnants of the Galactic Council scattered, the lesson was undeniable: never underestimate humanity. They had proven, beyond any doubt, that they were a force to be reckoned with, a species that could not only survive in the galaxy but thrive in it. And now, with the war behind them, humanity was ready to lead the way forward, on their terms.